For more than a century, outboards have been loud, mechanical, and dependent on regular attention. That formula built an entire industry around maintenance and repair. Now a new electric outboard from India is challenging that structure, not with spectacle, but with simplicity. It promises fewer moving parts, quieter operation, and a different ownership rhythm. The question is not whether gasoline disappears overnight. It is whether 2026 becomes the year the old model starts to feel outdated, the demo that felt like a warning. It starts as curiosity, the kind that pulls people in before they realize they have formed a crowd. A motor sits on a bracket and looks almost too clean, too sealed, too quiet. Someone advances the throttle, and nothing dramatic happens. No cough, no exhaust bark, no vibration telegraphing effort. The boat simply responds, immediate and smooth, like the water agreed to cooperate. The first few reactions are playful. Phones come out. People grin. Someone makes the same joke everyone makes the first time. It looks fake, like it is running on magic. But the humor fades the longer it goes on, because the silence is not the real story. The real story is control. The boat moves precisely when the lever moves. It does not hesitate, it does not surge unpredictably, and it does not make the dock feel like a chaotic place. Then the questions change. They stop being, how is it so quiet? And become, how far will it actually go? And what happens when you hit wind? And what does this cost when it is time to replace the battery? Those are not curiosity questions. Those are decision questions. That is the point where demonstrations stop being entertainment and start being market research in real time. Electric outboards used to lose the conversation right here, not because they were bad, but because they were limiting. Early models often felt like motors you had to plan around, ration, and baby. They fit a narrow slice of boating, protected waters, short runs, and people who accepted that range was not a suggestion, it was a rule. For years, that limitation protected the old order. Gasoline could remain the default because it was forgiving. You could improvise, you could detour, you could stay out longer without doing math. What feels different now is that the limiting part is shrinking, while the effortless part is growing. The experience is getting cleaner, easier, and more normal. And when something becomes normal, it spreads fast, especially if it removes the kinds of problems people quietly hate. A few minutes later, the conversation drifts away from the dock and into the part of boating nobody celebrates on camera: the shop, the service counter, and the invoices that kept the whole system stable, the business built on rituals and repairs. People love to talk about the thrill of speed and the romance of open water, but the industry has always been built around something less glamorous. It is built around maintenance. It is built around the expectation that your outboard will need attention, that you will return to the shop, that the season has a rhythm of service appointments and parts orders. For most owners, the deal has been simple, even when it is frustrating. You buy the boat for freedom, then you accept the rituals that come with it: oil changes, filters, fuel system quirks, winter preparation in cold climates, the occasional mystery problem that turns a sunny weekend into a tow and a repair bill. That cycle became normal, and normal became profitable. The most important truth about the dealership world is that the showroom is not always the main engine of profit. Boats sell on emotion, but service keeps the lights on. Labor in the shop, parts at the counter, storage, and recurring maintenance can be the steady income that makes a thin sales margin survivable. That is why the service bay has always mattered as much as the sales floor, even if it is less visible. This is where electric becomes disruptive in a way people underestimate. The most dangerous promise is not speed. It is fewer routine touchpoints, less oil, fewer consumable parts, fewer mechanical systems that require constant intervention. The promise is not that nothing ever breaks. Saltwater and real life will make sure something always breaks. But the promise is that the old calendar of predictable service work changes shape. That threatens more than revenue. It threatens identity. Mechanics build careers on knowing the quirks of combustion engines. Dealers build customer relationships around seasonal routines. Entire local economies depend on the predictable flow of boats in and out of service. When a new technology reduces those visits, it does not just change what people buy. It changes who gets paid, who stays busy, and who has leverage. That is why electrification creates a quiet resistance. Some of it is reasonable skepticism. Some of it is fear. Both look the same. From the outside, hesitation, doubt, and a preference for what has always worked. But hesitation has a weakness. Once a technology becomes good enough for enough people, the conversation shifts from opinions to habit. And the most surprising part of this shift is where the push is coming from, because it is not only the legacy brands steering the narrative. The outboard, the industry, was not watching. At first, it looks like the usual story: a new product, a new category, a new promise. But then you notice a pattern in who is building the systems and how they are describing them. The language is not only about horsepower and glamour, it is about platforms, ranges, and scaling. That is a different mindset. A few sentences into the deeper research, one detail keeps popping up after you get past the marketing noise. Some of the most serious new electric outboard development is coming from India, and it is being positioned as a ladder rather than a single trick. One of the names tied to that ladder is 𝐉𝐨𝐬𝐬, which describes an electric outboard platform called the 𝐁𝐴 series. The way it is presented is telling: outputs spanning from roughly 4 kilowatt up to roughly 75 kilowatt, with systems spanning from roughly 48 volt up to roughly 750 volt. That range is not a single motor meant to impress at a show. It is a family meant to fit different boats, different duty cycles, and different infrastructure. A ladder matters because it changes the adoption story. Instead of asking an owner to leap into the unknown, it offers steps: small applications, mid-size applications, workboat applications, fleet applications. Once steps exist, the market can climb them gradually. And gradual change is the kind that sneaks up on industries that only fear sudden collapse. There is another reason this feels disruptive. Marine electrification is not just about motors. It is about systems, batteries, controllers, charging, software, and support. Company builds a platform across multiple voltages and outputs. It hints at deeper capability. It suggests they are designing for real deployment, not only for a viral clip. None of this guarantees a revolution. Saltwater destroys confidence fast. Owners have little patience for complicated charging routines, and boating has a brutal honesty. If it fails on a bad day, you do not call it a learning experience, you call it a mistake. So the only question that matters is how the experience feels in real life, and what problems it solves that gasoline outboards created for decades without apology. If you've ever stood at a dock deciding between convenience and range, drop a comment and say which way you'd go right now, electric or gasoline. And if this kind of behind-the-scenes boating context is useful to you, hit like and subscribe. More real-world outboard stories are coming. Torque, range, and the new kind of normal. The first time you drive an electric outboard, the sensation is not only silence, it is immediacy. The boat reacts the moment you ask it to. There is no winding up, no waiting for the engine to find the right rhythm. The thrust arrives smoothly, and the hull responds as if it has been paying attention. That instant, torque changes docking. It changes maneuvering in tight marinas. It changes how new boaters learn, because control feels more intuitive when there is less delay between your input and the boat's movement. It also changes the social experience of boating. Families can talk without shouting. You can hear the water. You can hear other boats. You can hear the world again. Range is the argument electric cannot escape. And it is the argument that has become more complex than the old stereotypes. A useful benchmark comes from Mercury Marine's Avator 7.5 electric outboard, which has been discussed with very different real-world distances depending on throttle. At constant full throttle, the distance can be roughly 5 miles on a 1 kilowatt-hour battery. At constant quarter throttle, the distance can stretch to roughly 34 miles. Those two numbers tell a deeper truth. Range is not one claim. It is a curve. Speed costs energy quickly, and the display makes that cost visible. That visibility makes people uncomfortable at first. Gasoline hides its math inside a tank. Electric makes the math part of the experience. But visibility also creates a new kind of confidence. You can plan precisely. You can see exactly what your choices do. Some owners will hate that. Others will find it addictive, because predictable planning can feel like freedom when you have spent years dealing with surprise mechanical problems. The larger conversation is not whether electric replaces gasoline everywhere. The more realistic question is how many boaters do not need everywhere in the first place. A huge amount of boating is local: harbor runs, marina cruising, fishing within a familiar radius, commuting to a mooring, short trips with family, protected waters, and repeat routes. For those people, the ability to roam for endless miles is less important than the ability to launch, enjoy the day, and come back without drama. This is where electrification wins quietly, not by conquering the offshore fantasy first, but by removing the daily annoyances that most boaters tolerate because they assumed there was no alternative. When the alternative becomes practical, tolerance collapses, and that collapse shows up in the place where the old system was strongest: the service bay, dealer economics, and the quiet pushback. A disruption often announces itself long before sales numbers change. You hear it in side conversations, in the way professionals choose their words when they are no longer selling optimism. The tone becomes careful. Discussions drift toward support, training, and liability. On the surface, those concerns are reasonable. Beneath them, there is often something else. An awareness that the ground holding everything up may be starting to shift. For decades, the outboard world has operated on two parallel economies. The first is the visible one, driven by new boat sales, new engine launches, and seasonal excitement. This is the part of the business most customers see. The second economy lives behind the scenes. It is built on service work, parts, storage, and the steady churn of ownership realities. Even the most reliable gasoline outboard generates a predictable stream of labor. Oil changes, fuel system upkeep, corrosion checks, winter preparation, and long-term mechanical wear all create reasons for boats to return to the shop year after year. Electric changes that balance. It does not eliminate service, but it reshapes it. Instead of routine mechanical rituals, the focus shifts toward electronics, software diagnostics, battery health, charging systems, and high-voltage safety procedures. That kind of work can be profitable, but it does not follow the same seasonal rhythm that shops have relied on for stability. It also requires new training, new certifications, and new tools. Some technicians see opportunity in that shift and lean into it. Others feel their hard-earned expertise losing relevance. For dealers, the idea that fewer mechanics may be needed for certain tasks introduces a quiet anxiety that never makes it into marketing materials. The emotional weight of this change becomes clearest when you look at big outboards. Large gasoline engines carry large expectations and large consequences. When a 200 horsepower or 300 horsepower outboard fails, the cost is not just financial. Owners remember the feeling of being stranded, the call for a tow, and the tension of arguing over warranty coverage. Those experiences linger, and they fuel the loyalty battles and brand conflicts that define much of boating culture. This is why electrification will eventually face its toughest test in the high-power segment. If electric systems move into that territory, they inherit the same expectations: reliability under sustained load, predictable behavior in rough conditions, and failure modes that feel manageable rather than catastrophic. Until electric proves itself there, gasoline will continue to dominate the emotional high ground. But disruption rarely starts at the top. It works its way in from the edges. It erodes the market where most boating actually happens, in local waters, short runs, and everyday use. That is where volume and habit live. And habit can change faster than anyone expects once owners experience a new baseline for what normal feels like. This is where the quiet twist appears. Not the flagship electric motor that draws headlines, but the smaller electric outboard that nobody brags about. The one that solves daily problems, reduces friction, and spreads familiarity without fanfare. Those motors do not start revolutions with noise. They start them by making the old way feel unnecessarily complicated. The underdog electric that spreads the habit. Small electric outboards used to be the fastest way to lose an audience, because they felt like a narrow niche. They were easy to dismiss as toys. The trick is that they become powerful when they are framed correctly, not as the main event, but as the surprising tool that solves real problems better than people expect. The most convincing small and mid-size electrics are not trying to compete with a 300 horsepower offshore machine. They are trying to win the daily use case. They aim at the owner who wants quiet marina runs, reliable starting, fewer fuel hassles, and a boat that feels modern without demanding a complete lifestyle change. One example that sits right in that unexpectedly serious zone is 𝐁𝐨𝐬𝐬's 10 horsepower electric outboard, described at roughly 7.3 kilowatt output on a 72-volt system. That is a specification that lands differently now, because it is not an afterthought. It is a motor designed for real utility, the kind that fits the boats most people actually use most of the time. This is how underdogs become dealer favorites in private. A dealer may not lead with a smaller electric on the sales floor if the customer walked in dreaming of a powerful gasoline engine, but the same dealer might recommend it quietly to someone with a tender, a small fishing boat, a short commute, or a lake requirement. It solves headaches with fewer moving parts. It reduces the chances of certain familiar problems, especially those tied to fuel systems and seasonal neglect. It offers an ownership experience that feels cleaner and calmer. Once owners trust electric in a smaller role, the psychological barrier to electric as a primary motor drops. The owner stops asking, "Can it work?" and starts asking, "What would it take to scale this?" That question is where platform builders become dangerous, because a platform suggests you can climb rather than leap. If India's approach is truly ladder-shaped from small outputs to larger systems, then small electric outboards become more than products. They become the first rung. A first rung is how revolutions spread without looking like revolutions. But every clean story has hidden complexity, and electrification carries a supply chain and a set of ethical questions that can shape adoption in ways that are easy to ignore until the market gets big. The battery shadow behind the clean wake. From the dock, electric looks like a perfect future. No exhaust smell, no oily sheen, less noise, and fewer visible maintenance rituals. The temptation is to treat that as a clean, moral upgrade. The reality is more complicated. Every electric outboard depends on batteries, and batteries connect boating to a supply chain that stretches far beyond the marina. Lithium, nickel, and other materials come from real places with real costs. Even when manufacturers move toward chemistries like lithium iron phosphate to reduce certain risks, the broader system still relies on mining, processing, shipping, and eventual recycling. The boating world is not used to thinking about those upstream consequences, but adoption has a way of forcing uncomfortable questions. There is also the practical shadow that owners care about first: cost and longevity. Batteries are expensive, and even if their lifespan improves, owners worry about replacement years down the line. Some will gladly pay for simplicity and quiet. Others will hesitate because they fear that the maintenance-free dream simply shifts costs into a different category. Saltwater adds another layer. Marine environments punish electronics. Corrosion attacks connectors and housings with patient persistence. Manufacturers can design for it, but public trust is earned slowly, especially when early adopters become storytellers. In boating culture, a single dramatic failure can outweigh 100 quiet successes, because people imagine themselves as the one, stranded offshore. Then there is regulation. Rules around emissions, noise, and protected waterways can turn electric from an option into a requirement in certain areas. That does not eliminate gasoline overnight, but it fragments the market. Some places become electric-friendly by design, and once a technology becomes normal in those places, it gains legitimacy everywhere else. This is where the pressure builds toward 2026. Not because that year is magical, but because it represents the point where electrification becomes hard to treat as a novelty, when systems scale, when small electrics spread familiarity, when local use cases normalize the experience, and when infrastructure slowly improves, the market can tip without warning. The final question is not whether boating survives. It is whether the old ecosystem dealers, service departments, legacy expectations can adjust before the quiet becomes permanent. 2026, and the people who stand to lose the most. Most revolutions feel slow right until they do not. For years, electric outboards could be dismissed as niche because they fit narrow use cases. But once a technology becomes practical for everyday boating, it stops asking permission. It becomes the default for certain buyers, and defaults spread. 2026 matters because it looks like a threshold year, the point where electric outboards are no longer limited to the smallest roles and no longer defined only by compromises. Platform thinking systems that span multiple outputs and voltages suggests a more mature approach. It implies electrification is being built as infrastructure, not as a novelty. Legacy outboard brands will not surrender quietly. They will compete on reliability, performance, and network strength. They will emphasize the security of established dealer support and the familiarity of combustion. They will also push their own electric offerings, because survival often looks like joining the thing you once dismissed. But the deepest tension sits inside the dealership model. If electric reduces traditional maintenance rituals, the service calendar shifts. Shops adapt by moving toward installation, electronics, charging systems, battery health services, and new kinds of support packages. Some will do it well and become leaders. Others will struggle because their current stability is tied to old routines that electric weakens. For owners, the future will be mixed for a long time. Gasoline will remain powerful where long-range freedom and high power matter most. Electric will grow fastest where daily convenience, quiet, and predictable operation matter more than top-end speed. Over time, those growth zones can become culturally dominant because they match how most people actually boat. The most disruptive outcome is not the sudden death of gasoline. It is a slow migration of expectations. Once enough owners experience quiet torque, clean operation, and fewer service headaches, it becomes harder to accept the old hassles as normal. And when that happens, the industry does not collapse in one moment. It shifts, money shifts, training shifts, influence shifts. The surprising part is that the shift is being accelerated by builders outside the traditional center of gravity, including serious electrification efforts coming from India. If those systems prove durable in real-world salt, heat, and heavy use, they will not need to be perfect. They will only need to be good enough, widely available, and easy to live with. This is not a future where gasoline vanishes overnight and every dock goes silent in one season. Change comes in stages, starting with the boats and places that never needed unlimited range to feel free. 2026 feels like the moment this stops being theoretical, as electric platforms turn into habits instead of experiments. The pressure is not evenly distributed, and some parts of the industry will feel it first. Electric does not remove problems, it rearranges them. If you have seen this shift at your marina, comment with what surprised you most. If this helped clarify what is happening, like the video and subscribe.